It is. Name of sender?
Carter. John Carter.
I could trust no one else. I had long suspected that the Therns were following my movements. I feel remarkable.
Welcome to Screen Recaps, and today we are going to be recapping the movie John Carter. The film commences on an unusual world named Barsoom. This planet is divided into three prominent realms known as Helium, Zodanga, and Tharks. Helium and Zodanga have been embroiled in a long-standing conflict. In the opening scenes of the movie, we witness the Helium army, donned in azure uniforms, engaging in a fierce battle with the Zodanga forces, clad in crimson uniforms. General Subthan of Zodanga is approached by three individuals who identify themselves as envoys of a divine entity known as Thern. Thern's leader, Matai Shang, bestows upon him an enigmatic azure weapon, declaring him the chosen recipient by the goddess. The Therns have resolved to aid Zodanga in the ongoing war. They command a mysterious azure energy known as the Ninth Ray, which grants them superior strength compared to other inhabitants of Barsoom. Our narrative then shifts to the year 1881 in New York City. A gentleman named Edgar receives a summons from his uncle, John Carter, to visit New York City. Upon Edgar's arrival at the station, he is cordially received by John's butler, who escorts him to John's grand residence. As it happens, John is a prosperous individual and a former Confederate Army captain.
John's attorney sorrowfully informs Edgar of John's unexpected passing. John has bequeathed his extensive fortune entirely to Edgar. The attorney then escorts a taken-aback Edgar to John's mausoleum, where his remains are preserved. Strangely, the mausoleum's entrance can only be unlocked from within. Later, the attorney presents Edgar with a personal journal penned by John, a document meant solely for Edgar's perusal. After the lawyer's departure, Edgar begins to read the journal. It commences by acknowledging that Edgar was the sole individual who believed in John's extraordinary tales during his youth, making it fitting to share this account with Edgar. The narrative transports us to post-Civil War Arizona. John Carter, a former captain in the Confederate Army, currently explores caverns in search of gold. Powell is a Union colonel intent on enlisting John's assistance for the U.S. cavalry against the Apache. He resorts to abducting John and attempting to conscript him as a soldier. Nevertheless, John is resolute in his refusal to continue as a soldier. After numerous unsuccessful escape attempts, he succeeds in breaking free by incapacitating a guard and appropriating the colonel's horse. The colonel and his men soon pursue him, encountering a mounted Apache war party not far away. The colonel and his men engage in a firefight with the locals. John attempts to flee amidst the chaos, but the colonel sustains an injury during the skirmish. Out of compassion, John aids the wounded colonel and escorts him to a nearby cavern. This particular cave is unfamiliar to John, as he had never ventured here in search of gold. Upon entering, he strikes a match and is utterly astonished to behold a multitude of gold deposits adorning the cave's ceiling. However, in that moment, an individual materializes behind him. This man is one of the Therns we encountered at the movie's outset. The colonel alerts John, prompting a confrontation with this enigmatic stranger. John fires his weapon, causing the man to collapse. As John approaches the fallen figure, he hears the man utter the word Barsoom, while gazing at a peculiar medallion in his grasp. John retrieves the medallion and repeats the word Barsoom. Suddenly, a brilliant blue radiance emanates from the locket. When John reopens his eyes, he finds himself in an unfamiliar desert landscape. He rises and attempts to walk, but finds himself stumbling with every step as if he can hover mid-air. Perplexed, he practices ambulating in this unfamiliar environment. As he progresses, he reaches a nearby hill where he observes several eggs hatching. At that moment, a substantial assembly of green beings with 6 limbs emerges, riding massive creatures. Their leader initiates an assault on John, prompting him to execute a colossal leap. The others cease firing at John upon their leader's command. The creature communicates in an unfamiliar tongue and introduces himself as Tas Tarkus. John introduces himself as John Carter from Virginia, yet the creatures mistakenly interpret his name as Virginia. Tarkus encourages John to leap as he did earlier, but John declines and engages him in combat. The creatures wound John and take him captive. During their conversation, we learn that their kind is known as the Tharks. Meanwhile, on the same planet, Deja, the princess of the city of Helium, rehearses the presentation of a weapon she has designed for her father, the king of Helium. Helium is embroiled in a conflict with another city, Zodanga, and faces imminent defeat due to the alliance of the Therns with Zodanga. Deja has deciphered the secret of the ninth ray employed by Zodanga in warfare. However, when she demonstrates her invention to the king, an individual secretly triggers a malfunction, causing the weapon to explode. The ruler of Zodanga, Sabtan, desires to wed Deja as a means to end the war, but she vehemently opposes this union. If Sabtan marries her, he would ascend to the position of Prince of Helium and gain dominion over all of Barsoom. Meanwhile, the Tharks transport John to their city and place him alongside the newborn Tharks infants. During the night, a female Tharks named Sola administers a liquid to John, after which he gains the ability to comprehend the Tharks language. John realizes that the medallion is in Tarkus's possession, and without it, he cannot return home. The ensuing day, the Tharks instruct John to perform a high leap before an audience. Suddenly, two warships materialize in the sky, with Helium and Zodanga engaged in combat. The Tharks view the war as entertainment, placing bets on the outcome. Among the combatants, Princess Deja is seen battling on the ships. She attempts to control the vessel, but falls from it in the process. John, utilizing his newfound leaping abilities, rescues the princess. The Tharks begin cheering for John, who now joins forces with Deja in combat against the Zodanga soldiers. John manages to sway the course of the battle, resulting in Helium's victory. Nevertheless, their ship also crashes. Deja and John find themselves in the company of the Tharks. Tarkus is impressed by John's actions and designates him as his right-hand man. Although John initially hesitates, he does not object. During the night, Deja and John engage in conversation, during which Deja discloses to John that they are on Mars, referred to as Barsoom. John expresses astonishment and disbelief, stating that he hails from Earth, a notion Deja finds equally hard to accept. Owing to his heightened bone density and the planet's low gravity, Carter possesses extraordinary strength and leaping prowess. Subsequently, Deja leads him to the Tharks Temple, a place forbidden for humans to enter. She hopes that the temple holds secrets regarding interdimensional travel. A kind-hearted female Tharks named Sola follows them, pleading for them to desist. Deja reveals to John the statue of the goddess Isis, and interprets some inscriptions that she believes hold significance. However, their actions lead to their arrest by the Tharks, with a death sentence looming for trespassing into the temple. When they are alone in the cell, Tarkus requests privacy with the prisoners, revealing that he is Sola's father and does not want them to meet their demise at the hands of the Tharks. He passes John his medallion and instructs him to proceed to the River Is in order to unravel the enigma of the goddess Isis and find his way back to his own world. When the Tharks peer into the chamber later on, they discover that Tarkus has turned against them. Tarkus's rival, Talhaju, assumes command and proclaims himself the new leader. Subsequently, we witness John, Deja, and Sola embarking on their journey to the River Is. Deja takes the lead, but Sola eventually confides in John that they are actually headed toward the city of Helium instead of the river. John confronts her about this revelation, uncovering her intention to enlist him as a soldier in her city's war effort. Disheartened, John requests Sola to lead the way, and leaves Princess Deja behind. Deja explains that her motive was to avoid marriage to Sabthan, and John implores her to accompany him to the river. With no alternative, she agrees. The trio traverses the River Is and arrives at an immense inverted pyramid. John and Deja ascend to its pinnacle, where they observe an unusual azure energy forming on the ground. Deja recognizes this as the power of the ninth ray, from which she had fashioned her weapon. They also deduce that Carter's presence on Mars likely resulted from the transmission of a duplicate of himself from Earth to Mars facilitated by the ninth ray. Suddenly, a legion of warhounds approaches, led by Matai Chang, the leader of the Therns. John valiantly instructs Deja and Sola to flee while he confronts the warhound army alone. The King of Helium dispatches his forces to assist John, who vanquishes the warhounds and rescues them. They transport the injured John to Helium. Deja returns home and encounters her father. Her surprise mounts upon seeing the king of Zodanga Sabthon present. He has arrived without weapons or troops to propose marriage to Deja, thereby ending the war. With no other recourse to halt the conflict, Deja reluctantly consents to marry him. In the subsequent scene, we find John convalescing in a chamber within a Helium palace. A guard designated by Deja retrieves him and clandestinely escorts him to her chamber. Deja implores John to employ the medallion to return to his home. As guards enter her chamber, John vanishes from sight. Deja presumes that he has returned to Earth, but in reality, John is concealed from the soldiers. Upon their departure, he endeavors to venture outside, but is swiftly apprehended by Ma Tai-Shang. John is taken aback by Ma Tai-Shang's remarkable capacity to morph into any creature in his vicinity. The entire city is abuzz with preparations for the forthcoming wedding. Ma Tai-Shang secures John to himself through the utilization of technology devised from the ninth ray, rendering John incapable of controlling his own movements. It appears that Ma Tai-Shang is manipulating him through a wrist device. In a surprising revelation, Ma Tai-Shang discloses that Sabtan intends to assassinate Deja and seize control of Helium following the wedding. The Therns sided with Sabtan in the war due to his susceptibility to manipulation, but Ma Tai-Shang's true ambition is to dominate all of Barsoom through Sabtan. Ma Tai-Shang is on the verge of dispatching John when an extraterrestrial dog John had befriended earlier comes to his rescue. It severs Ma Tai-Shang's wrist device, liberating John. He hastily boards a flying craft and departs to prevent Deja from marrying Sabtan. However, John lacks the knowledge to pilot the aircraft and crash lands near the Tarks' territory. They hold him captive alongside a battered Tarks. Tal Haju, who is now the leader of the Tarks, places John and the Tarks with colossal beasts known as the White Apes. Astoundingly, John somehow manages to subdue the apes in front of the entire Tarks population. He subsequently challenges Tal Haju to a duel and defeats him effortlessly. A jubilant crowd celebrates John as the new leader of the Tarks. He then persuades them to aid him in the battle against Zodanga. The Tarks army, led by John, proceeds to Deja and Sabtan's wedding ceremony. John arrives just in the nick of time to halt the wedding. Saban, upon seeing him, attempts to harm Deja, but John intervenes just in time. A renewed conflict erupts between the soldiers of the two cities, with the Tharks now aligned with Helium. Zodanga ultimately faces defeat, although Ma Tai-Shang asserts that he has managed to escape with John's medallion. John intends to reside on Mars as Deja's husband, choosing not to actively seek the medallion. They marry, and the crowd jubilantly celebrates their union. He now holds the title of Prince of Helium. The following morning, John and Deja stand on a balcony. Deja momentarily leaves John outside, and it is during this moment that Ma Tai-Shang materializes. Ma Tai-Shang successfully employs the medallion to transport John back to Earth. When John awakens, he finds himself coated in dust, and his beard has grown considerably long. He remains within the same cave, directing his gaze towards Colonel Powell's remains. He scans his surroundings for a medallion, but comes up empty-handed. His means of return are non-existent. The gold veins within the cave bring him wealth, and he recognizes that there are more medallions on Earth. Consequently, he establishes a mining corporation. Eventually, he stumbles upon one at a site, a discovery that fills him with delight. However, he remains aware that the Therns have been monitoring him all along. Protecting his earthly body is imperative because any harm inflicted upon it would result in his demise on both planets. This is precisely why his mausoleum only opens from the inside. His demise had been meticulously orchestrated to facilitate his return to Mars. John documents in his diary his desire for Edgar to safeguard his mausoleum against the Therns, in exchange for the wealth he has accumulated. Edgar is left in shock after reading the diary. He proceeds to the mausoleum and attempts to unlock it using a secret password, which, as it turns out, is Ned, the childhood name by which John addressed Edgar. As the mausoleum doors swing open, an approaching Thern approaches Edgar. However, before any harm can befall Edgar, an unknown figure from behind incapacitates the Thern. Edgar is astounded to find his uncle standing before him. John retrieves the Thern's medallion. It becomes evident that he had never actually found a medallion. The entirety of this elaborate scheme, including his supposed demise, had been orchestrated to lure a Thern and acquire their medallion. John then implores Edgar to assume the role of protecting his mausoleum moving forward and proceeds inside it. He reclines on the bed with the medallion and commences the incantation that will transport him back to Mars once more. But we anticipate your prompt return here soon.